Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Should the government guarantee the rights of over 3 million EU citizens living in the UK? Well, this week the Lords said yes, and they've been joined this morning by the Brexit Committee. Certainly no collection of Remainers, with leading Brexiteer Michael Gove on board. Well, I'm joined now by the chairman of that committee, the Labour MP Hilary Benn. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Good morning, Sophie.
Well, your committee has backed very strongly this idea that the government should guarantee the rights of EU citizens already living in the UK. How damaging do you think that the government stance is at the moment?
Well, we took evidence from representatives of the 3 million, and they, and also the 1.2 million Brits who are living and working in other European countries, have felt very unsure about what the future holds for them since the referendum result last June. And this is about people's lives, their families, their futures, what are children going to go on and do. And we are unanimously recommending as a committee that the government should deal with the bit it has control over, which is the position of the 3 million European citizens who are here, and take a unilateral decision now to say, it's OK, you can stay.
So it was unanimous then?
It was.
You've got these leading Leave supporters, Michael Gove, John Whittingdale, they're all on board as well?
It was a unanimously agreed report by the Select Committee. And I think it has great weight precisely because that is the case. And we also think that it will assist in securing the position of the 1.2 million Brits abroad. Because when we took
That's a crucial point, isn't it, though? Well, because there'll be lots of people listening to this thinking, well, the government is saying they don't want to guarantee the rights of EU citizens until they get guarantees for Brits living abroad. You are effectively, you could say, abandoning those people to be used as hostages in the negotiations by EU countries.
Absolutely not doing that at all. I mean, first of all, when we took evidence from representatives of British citizens living abroad, you might have expected, Sophie, they would have come to us and said, yeah, please don't guarantee the rights of the EU citizens until you've sorted us out. They didn't say that. They said the government should take this step in relation to the 3 million who are here because they thought it will create the right climate. I think it's about leading by example. And in the end, does anyone seriously imagine that we're going to end up in a situation where the 27 member states say to the 1.2 million Brits, off you go, any more than we would say to doctors, nurses, university lecturers, people serving in hotels and restaurants, people working in manufacturing, picking and processing vegetables, jobs that EU citizens do currently in the UK, that we're going to say to them, right,
well,
you can go.
You say that, though, but the Chancellor Philip Hammond has said this morning that actually there are EU countries who are blocking the idea of a reciprocal deal.
David Davis said previously that most of the other member states were signed up to this. I think he said there were a couple who weren't. But look, even if there were to be a problem with the 27, is anyone seriously suggesting that we would turn round and say to the EU citizens who are here, living, working, paying tax, living in our communities, contributing, off you go? And they said to us, nobody wants to be used as a bargaining chip. They don't want to be used as a bargaining chip. This is about people and their lives. And I think if we lead by example, I'm sure we'll end up in the end with a deal where everybody gets to stay, and that great uncertainty which is felt by those citizens, the Brits abroad and the EU citizens here, will then be put on one side because we've got loads of other things to negotiate about with the 27 member states as we leave.
Your report is also talking about the need to skill up British nationals in case EU citizens do start to leave. You must welcome then the idea that the government is launching these new T levels, technical qualifications to rival A levels?
We should always be investing more in training and skills. And the truth is that some employers of Britain have decided to take advantage of training that's taken place in other countries. And our economic future as a nation depends on us having the right skills because, you know, in a world of globalisation and change, what are Britain's great strengths as a nation? Our language, increasingly becoming a global language, our creativity, our skill, our education, all of those things, and investing in that so that every young person in this country has a chance to bring out the talent that's within them and come and take a job and contribute to our economic growth and development. So we're ready to take advantage of technological change that will continue to come, and Britain can remain a strong economy, because that's how the money is raised to pay for health and education and all of the other things which we greatly value.
Let's talk about Brexit a bit more generally. The Chancellor has said that he's going to put £60 billion aside to insulate against any of the difficult economic winds ahead. That, to me, seems like a bit of an indication that things could get a bit rocky, and yet Labour doesn't seem to be providing any meaningful opposition. The Brexit bill sailed through the House of Commons unamended. That was your big chance to change the shape of Brexit, and you just rolled over.
I don't agree with that at all. There are two separate things here. The first is, do you respect the result of the referendum? Now, I was a passionate Remain campaigner. Labour campaigned vigorously for Remain, but we lost. And if you say you respect the outcome of the referendum and then don't give effect to that, because the only way to do that is to press the Article 50 button, then what does it mean? And I'd say to you, Sophie, look, there's a bit of a crisis of confidence in politics, in Britain, across Europe, across many parts of the world. Imagine what it would be like if Parliament were to turn round to the 52% who voted to leave and said, well, actually, we know better than you, we're staying. I mean, that, I think, is just, could not happen. However, all the referendum decided was we're leaving. What it did not decide is the terms on which we leave or the new relationship we're going to have with Europe. And there we've been very clear. The absolute priority is to ensure that we continue to have tariff and barrier-free trade. Now, I think the government is taking a risk, speaking personally, because it says we'd like to sign trade deals with other countries, but to keep tariff and barrier-free trade. Now, if Europe agrees to that, okay. But Europe may say in the negotiations, well, I'm afraid that sounds like having your cake and eating it. And if that is the case, if we want to ensure that business can continue to export and import without tariffs, but crucially, without delay, bureaucracy, paperwork, and so on, we need to have tariff-free trade. And if we're going to ensure that there remains a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, where there isn't a return of customs posts, because when we were in Dublin recently as a select committee, the message we got from the Irish politicians we met there was, under no circumstances can that happen.
Clearly some big questions ahead, all the more need for a strong opposition. I just want to have a look at what you said last year when you were sacked from the Shadow Cabinet about the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. You said that there can be no confidence that Labour can win the next election with Jeremy as leader. Now, since then, you've lost Copeland, your majority's been cut in Stoke. Do you still feel that with Jeremy Corbyn as leader, Labour has no chance of winning the next election?
Well, I don't resolve from what I said in the summer, but there was then followed, as you know, by another leadership election, and Labour Party members decided to re-elect Jeremy.
But you still think that's true?
But I respect the outcome of that. Our job is to work together. We are clearly facing a very challenging situation as the Labour Party. You look at our position in the opinion polls, and how, in the end, are we going to change that? By being united, but crucially, arguing for the right things in relation to Brexit, but also addressing the fundamental questions, Sophie, that face our society. What is the Labour Party for? We have values and beliefs that are unchanging, but we apply them to a world that is changing. What are we going to do about the care of our elderly? The biggest, but this is what we need to be talking about, not about the internal workings of the party and who's doing what.
Of course.
Because we have a job to work together.
But to change those things, you need to be close to power or in power. Now, you are somebody who is the son of Tony Benn. You joined the Labour Party when you were 16 years old. It's in your blood. You're clearly passionate about the party. With the Labour Party in crisis, surely this is now the time to be in the trenches fighting for the party. If things don't get better, will you step up? Would you run as leader?
Well, I'm not standing to be leader of the Labour Party, and there isn't a vacancy because Jeremy is the leader and has been re-elected by the party members. But we campaign and fight every single day for the interests of the Labour Party. That's why I joined all those years ago. That's why there are so many members of the Labour Party. But how are we going to have the best chance of persuading the British people to put their trust and confidence in us once again? It is to talk about the concerns that the British people have. How are we going to care for our elderly? How do we build the homes for the next generation? How do we ensure that the next wave of technological change doesn't result in more insecurity at work, more people on 0 hours contracts, more young people who start work and think, I don't have any prospect at the moment of saving for my pension. Now, those are the big challenges that our society faces, and Labour has historically in the past been able to find answers to that. And when we turn our attention to that, rather than debating amongst ourselves, then I think we'll have a better chance of persuading the British people to put in a Labour government once again.
Hilary Benn, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let me see what's coming up next. The government was defeated last week in the House of Lords. Peers amended the bill that will allow Theresa May to trigger Brexit to guarantee the rights of EU nationals currently in the UK. The government says it will remove the amendment when the bill returns to the Commons later this month. But a report today from the Commons Brexit Select Committee also calls for the government to make a unilateral decision to safeguard the rights of EU nationals living here.
If the worst happened, are we actually going to say to 3 million Europeans here who are nurses, doctors, serving us tea and coffee in restaurants, giving lectures at Leeds University, picking and processing vegetables, right, off you go? No, of course we're not going to say that. So why not end the uncertainty for them now? Because I think that will help to create the climate which will ensure that everyone gets to stay, because that's what all of us want. And that's why we've unanimously agreed this recommendation that the government should now make a unilateral decision to say to the EU citizens who are here, contributing, working, paying tax, yes, you can stay, because we think that's the right and fair thing to do.
And we're joined now from Buckinghamshire by the Leader of the House of Commons, David Lidington. Welcome back to the programme, Mr Lidington. The House of Lords has amended the Article 50 bill to allow the unilateral acceptance of EU nationals' right to remain in the UK. Is it still the government's intention to remove that amendment in the Commons?
Yes, we've always been clear that we think this bill is very straightforward. It does nothing else except give the Prime Minister the authority that the courts insist upon to start the Article 50 process of negotiating with the other 27 EU countries. And I think on the particular issue of EU citizens here and British citizens overseas, the PM did suggest at the December European Summit last year that we do a pre-negotiation agreement on this, and that wasn't acceptable to all of the other 27 because they'd taken a view that you can't have any kind of negotiation until the Article 50 process has been triggered. Okay, that's where we are. I hope that with goodwill and rational self-interest on all sides, we can tackle this right at the start of those negotiations,
all right, well,
which I hope will be underway
let me come on to
later
that.
this month.
But it's not just the Lords, is it? Because we've now got the cross-party Commons Brexit Committee saying you should now make a unilateral decision to safeguard the right of EU nationals in the UK. Even Brexiteers like Michael Gove, John Whittingdale, Peter Lilly agree. So why be so stubborn on this issue?
Because I think that this is it's a complex issue that goes beyond just rights of residents, but of things like access to healthcare, access to pension up ratings, to benefits and so on.
But you could settle the residence issue now.
Well,
you could settle that.
It's also, Andrew, because you've got to look at it from the point of view of the British citizens, well over 1 million, living elsewhere in Europe. Now, if we make a unilateral gesture, it might make us feel good for a bit, and yes, it would probably help in the short term those EU citizens who are here. But you've got those British citizens overseas who would then be potential bargaining chips in the hands of any of the 27 other governments, and we don't know who will be in office at the particular stages during the negotiation, and they might decide for completely extraneous reasons to hold up agreement on the rights of British citizens. The sensible way to deal with this as 28 mature democracies is to get around the table, start the negotiations and agree on something that is fair to all sides and is reciprocal in character.
What countries do you think might take on UK nationals living in the EU? What countries are you frightened of on this issue?
The one thing that I know from my own experience in the past of being involved in European negotiations is that issues come up that maybe it's nothing to do with British nationals, but another issue that matters a huge amount to a particular government, may not be a government that's even in office yet elsewhere in the EU, and they suddenly decide, well, we can get something from the Brits out of this, so let's just hold up agreement on British citizens till the British move in the direction we want on issue X. Now, I hope it doesn't come to that. I think that the messages I've had from EU ambassadors in London and from those of my former Europe minister colleagues around Europe, I've been in touch with is that, no, we want this to be a done deal as quickly as possible. That's the British government's very clear intention. We'd hoped that we could get a reciprocal deal agreed before the Article 50 process. That was not possible.
No, I understand that, Mr. We haven't got much time, and you've said that already. So let me cut. Is it really credible, even if there is no reciprocal rights deal being done, is it really credible that EU nationals already here would lose their right to live and work, or face deportation? You know that's not credible. You know that's not going to happen.
Well, we have already under our own system a rule whereby somebody who's been lawfully resident and working for five years can apply for permanent residence here. But it's not just about residence. This is about whether residence then carries with it certain rights of access to healthcare.
I understand that, but we've made this point. The point is you could guarantee them the residence now and deal with other matters later. It's the right to live and work here that worries them at the moment. And the Home Secretary has said there can be no change in their status without a vote in Parliament. Could you ever imagine the British Parliament voting to remove their rights to live and work here?
I think British Parliament will want to be very fair to EU citizens who, as Hilary Benn and others rightly say, have been overwhelmingly here, working hard, paying taxes, contributing to our society, but they will equally want to make sure in the British Parliament that there is a fair deal for our own citizens, more than 1 million elsewhere in Europe. And I don't think you can simply disentangle the issue of residence from those things that go with residence.
Is the Article 50 timetable to be triggered if the Prime Minister gets her way before the end of this month, is it threatened by these Lord's amendments?
I sincerely hope not, because the House of Lords has a perfectly respectable constitutional role to look again at bills sent up by the House of Commons, but they also have understood traditionally that as an unelected House, they have to give primacy to the elected Commons at the end of the day. And in this case, it's not just the elected Commons by an overwhelming majority that sent the bill up unamended, a majority of more than 300
so
in the
it's
Commons,
not threatened
but a referendum that lies behind that.
It's not threatened in your view?
I think not. I think we are still confident that we can get Article 50 triggered by the end of the month as the PM wants, and as Parliament has voted for.
Now, one of the other Lord's amendments that are coming up this week will be to have a meaningful vote on the Brexit deal when it's done at the end of the process. What's your view on that? What would you understand by a meaningful vote?
Well, the government's already said that there's going to be a meaningful vote at the end of the process.
What do you mean by meaningful?
That Parliament will get the opportunity to vote on the deal before it finishes the EU level process of going for consideration by the European Parliament.
But won't the choice be?
Already.
Parliament will be given a choice, as I understand it at the moment, between either vote for the deal that you've negotiated, or we leave on WTO rules. We crash out anyway. Is that what you mean by a meaningful choice?
Well, Parliament will get the chance to vote on the deal. But I think, Andrew, you put your finger on the problem with trying to write something into the bill, because any idea that the PM's freedom to negotiate is limited, any idea that if the EU 27 were to play hardball, that somehow that means that Parliament would take fright and reverse the referendum verdict, somehow just set aside the views of the British people, that would almost guarantee that it would be much more difficult to get the sort of ambitious, mutually beneficial deal for us and for the EU 27 that we want.
But let me just get you on this. Your idea of a meaningful vote in Parliament is the choice is either vote to accept this deal or we leave anyway. That's your idea of a meaningful vote.
Well, the Article 50 process is straightforward, and I mean, it was the position of both parties in the recent Supreme Court case that the Article 50 process, once triggered, is irrevocable. So that's in the EU treaties already. But we are saying very clearly that Parliament will get that right to debate and vote. I think the problem with what some in the House of Lords are proposing, I hope it is not a majority, is that the amendments that they would seek to insert would tie the Prime Minister's hands, would limit her negotiating freedom and put her in a more difficult position to negotiate on behalf of this country than should be the case.
All right. A year ago, you said it could take 6 to 8 years to agree a free trade deal with the EU. Now you think you can do it in 2. What's changed? What's changed your mind?
Oh, I was a very strong, passionate supporter of Remain during the referendum, as you know.
Right. And you thought it would take 6 to 8 years to do a trade deal?
I hope very much that we are able to conclude not just the terms of the exit deal, but the agreement that we are seeking on the long-term trade relationship, the cooperation on police and judicial policy with Europe within that time as well.
What makes you think you can now do it in 2 years when only a year ago you said it could take up to 8?
I think that there is the referendum clearly makes a big difference, and I think that there is an understanding amongst the other 27 governments now that it is in everybody's interests to sort this shared challenge out of negotiating a new relationship between the EU 27 and the United Kingdom, because European countries, those in and those who will be out of the EU, share the need to face up to massive challenges, whether from international terrorism, a truculent Russia to the east, or technological change.
All right. I mean, all that was pretty obvious a year ago, but we will see what happens. Thank you, David Lidington.
Joining me now is Gina Miller, the businesswoman who won a Supreme Court case, got to get my mouth around that, and forced the PM to get the assent of Parliament before triggering those all-important EU exit talks. Gina, you have been talking in this past few days about the possibility of going back to court over the whole issue of Parliament's rights. How likely is it that you will feel that you've got to go back to the High Court?
We won't know. It won't be for at least 18 months, because what I'm arguing for is upholding the judgment in my case, which was that only Parliament can have a say and a vote on people losing their rights. And we won't know that until the package comes back in 18 months' time. So even though the Prime Minister has made a promise, I'm saying it needs to be legally
So this is a promise,
required.
to be absolutely clear so people understand. Prime Minister has said that Parliament will have a final vote on the deal.
Yes.
And that vote, though, is allegedly on the deal or nothing. It's not a deal, it's not a vote that would allow her to go back for further negotiations. But would that satisfy you if there's a vote which is basically authorising the deal that she negotiates, or just basically saying we're out and there is no deal?
No, because
is that satisfactory for you?
No, it isn't in my view and my legal team, because if you think about it, going on to WTO, no deal would mean that we revert to WTO.
Right. World Trade Organisation, tariffs, taxes on goods, on exports and imports.
But that would mean that individuals lose their rights. And it's only Parliament, that's what the judgment said and upheld, is that only Parliament can vote on that. So they have to be involved again.
And just to be doubly clear on this, because it was slightly ambiguous, I thought, in some of the things that you were interpreted as having said. So on Tuesday, we're going to get a vote in the House of Lords on amending her Article 50 Brexit bill.
Yes.
And that amendment would say there has to be this final vote.
A meaningful vote, yes.
And now, if the Lords carry that, and it then goes back to the Commons, and the Commons throw it out, that wouldn't be a moment for you to launch the legal case.
No, because this bill, it would be, to my mind, it's common sense, or would be common sense for the government to just pass the 2 amendments, one on the EU citizens and one on this vote.
But they don't want to do that.
But they don't want to do that. So the bill goes through.
And just to be clear, that's not for you,
no,
a big moment.
absolutely not, because my case was to put Parliament exactly where they are to make this vote. They make that vote, so it's not now, it's in 18 months' time.
Now, Douglas, I mean, you're a great parliamentarian. Gina's right about this. That this should be for Parliament, shouldn't it?
I've got tremendous respect for Gina for personally putting her head above the parapet on an issue she clearly feels passionately about, and kudos to you, Gina. Where I think as a vote leaver, I think we should also thank Gina, is Gina's actually helped consolidate the position of Brexit. Parliament is now, by an overwhelming majority, because of the court case, has been forced to come out and support Brexit. and across the wider country. I don't want a country...
So have you achieved the opposite, in fact, of what... Because you were for Remain, weren't you? Are you upset that, in a way, you've reinforced the Brexit tendency in Parliament?
Absolutely not. My case was not about undoing Brexit, as some of the right-wing press have decided to say. It wasn't. It was about
But would you
ensuring...
prefer that we'd stayed in?
No, it's not my decision. The country's voted. We need to leave. But it needs to be done in the correct way.
I don't want to live in a country that's split 52-48. And so I want to reach out to reasonable Remainers and turn it into 70-30, 80-20. And I think the way to do that, unwittingly, is to have Tony Blair, big vested interests, Peter Mandelson lining up on the other side and trying to, or being seen to try and subvert the referendum. That actually helps us build that new consensus.
But Hammond said, which is very interesting, that we are a country who respects the rule of law. Absolutely. That's exactly what my case was about.
And can I just ask, because I read a very interesting piece about you, about the pressures that you've been under, including seeing journalists go over to Guyana and try and persuade people there to talk about your dad. How horrible has that been?
Oh, there's no part of my life that hasn't been ransacked. I mean, it's been extraordinary. And I don't understand why, because surely this is the very thing that the passionate Leavers were talking about, which is sovereignty and Parliament. That's exactly what my case is about.
Of course, and that's why Douglas is right to commend Gina. It's totally ridiculous the government ever got into a position where the courts had to impose the power of Parliament onto Parliament or onto the executive when the campaign was about restoring the rights of Parliament. The trouble is, though, Douglas, if we're going to have a proper debate now about how we exit, it can't carry on being, and I think the argument we're having here, Gina's argument, is now irrelevant to this. It can't be, do we remain in and reverse things or go for hard Brexit? We've got to have a proper discussion now about how we're going to leave and how we're going to do so in the way which is good for Britain rather than bad for Britain.
And Gina, can I just ask you very briefly, so over the next year and a half, are you going to basically withdraw for a bit, or is there more that you want to do in the next year and a half?
Look, I've spent the last nearly decade fighting for transparency and scrutiny in the world of investments and charity. This is something that I feel very passionately about. I'll be keeping an eye because, as we've seen, we seem to have a vacuum of an opposition.
Now, very briefly, I just want to put one final thing to you, Douglas. I thought you were completely unambiguous, that you didn't leak anything in the Thanet by-election. That's right, you were completely...
Absolutely. The idea that I leaked anything is ridiculous and absurd. It's a total nonsense.
Anyway, I thought that was an absolutely gripping programme.